7 minutes. Our work is grounded in the very specificity of the political in this very contested border between Tijuana and San Diego. As you see, the buildings, the built matter is represented as white and the leftover space as black as the Tijuana's density crashes against the border. It's been important for our practice to radicalize the local, to understand the implications of the political economic power inscribed in the territory in 60 linear miles across the border, 30 miles deep into San Diego, 30 miles deep into Tijuana. We can begin by understanding that 30 miles deep into San Diego, we can find, for example, the conflict between top-down development and recipes of urbanization, destroying the topography of the edges of San Diego. Then we can find, for example, the conflict between large infrastructure in the watershed across Southern California. Along these 60 linear miles, a series of sites that spatialize, that make conflict physical and very present in the territory. The conflict between gated communities and everyday life. The conflict between military zones and environmental zones. The only places where the continuous urbanization from Los Angeles to Tijuana is interrupted is by the military bases, which in turn are also environmental zones. The conflict between the formal and the informal as neighborhoods in San Diego have been retrofitted by immigrants. The conflict between two cities that deny each other, that are indifferent to each other. As soon as we cross the border, the conflict between the river and the actual border wall, the conflict between informal settlements and natural ecologies deep into Tijuana, the conflict between factories and emergency housing, the crisis and conflict between the struggles of density and sprawl, and finally, at the other end of our 60 linear miles, the mama of all conflicts, the conflict between the natural and the political as finally the border wall that separates these two cities sinks into the Pacific Ocean. It is in this horizon of conflict where artistic and architectural practice should redefine itself, redefining its own procedures. So our practice has been straddling the strategies of the informal in the poorest settlements of Tijuana and the politics of discriminating zoning in the wealthy environments in northern San Diego. These tactics of transgression, of encroachment, the invisible flows between these two cities have been of inspiration to our practice. For example, the flow of people migrating from the south to the north, the impact of immigrants in redefining the American neighborhood on one direction, and in the opposite direction, the flow of waste coming from Southern California into Tijuana as Tijuana is rebuilding itself with the waste of the other. Small houses that are recuperated by speculators in Tijuana, bought from developers from San Diego as developers are building luxury condos in many of these environments. These houses are brought to Tijuana and put on top of moment frames, steel frames, leaving the space beneath open-ended for more narratives, more uses. This layered urbanization of intensity of programs is incredible to witness. Also, of course, the recycling and the importation of rubber tires to construct a small infrastructure that also look at what people are doing in conditions of social and economic emergency. They have figured out how to dismantle the tire, how to fold it, how to interlock it to produce a more efficient, more functional retaining wall. And of course, pallet racks to constructing habitation. And the most famous of these systems that is recycled from San Diego, the garage doors from Riverside and San Diego to construct entire emergency houses made with garage doors, etc. What is of interest here is not just the image of the informal, but its fundamental socioeconomic procedures. The political economy of waste, as some of the levee towns of Southern California have begun to dismantle themselves in the last 25 years, and their debris is transferred 20 minutes south to construct the new periphery of Tijuana. This idea that Levittown is being recycled into Tijuana's slums is incredible to witness, and through that exchange, the conflict between factories, labor, and emergency housing. So we've been negotiating with factories to produce, in fact, micro-infrastructures that can produce systems of support for this precarious urbanism. While waste is going south, what is of interest for our practice primarily is the other flow, which is people going north in search for dollars, the impact of immigration in redefining the American neighborhood. This is a story of land use. The large swatches of color in San Diego and the high pixelation of Tijuana beneath. In the last 25 years, this high pixelation of use has begun to infiltrate itself, contaminating the largeness of land use in San Diego, so that the levee towns also of the mid-city, of the older rings of suburbanization, have begun to be altered out of this urbanism of encroachment and adaptation of informal economies economies and densities, including the non-conforming Buddha, which is in fact a post-war bungalow that in the last 25 years has transformed into a Buddhist temple. This idea that a house, a static object, has become an agency to negotiate economic, cultural, and pedagogical transactions with the neighborhood suggests the necessity to redefine density for all of us, not seen as an amount of objects thrown on the territory, but as a series of exchanges, an amount of socio-economic transactions at the scale of the neighborhood. So our project in San Diego has dealt with the conflict between lending and land use, negotiating new economies and micropolitics between the top-down economics and politics of development and the bottom-up social activism in neighborhoods. Out of this, the redefinition of housing primarily as to create out of these dynamics micropolitics, microeconomies at the scale of the neighborhood in relationship to non-profit organizations mediating many of these transactions. And finally, of course, the intervention in microparcels and small parcels that begin to suggest that housing in these neighborhoods of marginality cannot exist on their own. Housing needs to be plugged with microinfrastructure, social service, pedagogical and cultural programming, etc. I think, in essence, I would suggest that all of these dynamics begin to redefine the need to redefine our tools, our practice. We as artists and architects can be the translators of this ethical knowledge embedded, this intelligence embedded in these communities of practice. We can be the producers of new conceptions of citizenship and the reorganizers of resources and collaborations across jurisdictions and communities. Finally, we as artists and designers, I think, we could be the designers of political process of an alternative economic frameworks. Thank you.